It works now. Yeah, it's good. It's good. It's good. Well, I think we have a super exciting session. I mean, we're still waiting for some of the speakers, but we know that time is super, super limited, and we have a lot to discuss. So I think we start. And again, welcome to all of you at this building pavilion, in case if it's one of the first sessions here. Again, this pavilion is really about a lot of the very practical discussion. So be active, so ask questions. So we would like to be really very practical in our discussion. And this event is especially exciting because we are launching the kind of joint guides on buildings and construction related to NDCs in countries. It's already on the website. So I think now we would like to get our hands dirty and start testing. And I heard already, there are very practical experiences how it is done. But this is the whole COP is speaking about NDCs, right? And today I was also at the events of launch of the UNEP emissions gap report, and it is very exciting that now in the emissions gap report, they're also going sector specific, including on the building construction sector. So this is really helps us to connect to the kind of the wider discussion in COPs, much stronger to connect, and therefore kind of plug in these guides that we're launching today into kind of the wider discussion on the guidance, how we get to the very ambitious, investable, actionable, and equitable NDCs. I think this is like four keywords are very, very important. But we know that it's still a lot for us to be done, and I think we're very much looking for discussion today because the data about the sector is very, very fragmented, and the building sector is also bringing together authorities from so many different organizations, like from maybe from finance, from buildings, from urban planning. So it's fragmentation is definitely one of the issues that we need to tackle. Well, you probably, I hope probably coming here, you maybe had time. Maybe you didn't have time yet to read the guides. I don't know how many of you managed to read. Could you raise your hand? Yes. Not many yet. That's good. That's good to present it today. But anyway, it's already available on the Global ABC website. It's rather kind of compact document, so you can read it already. But it has this kind of very concrete 5-step approach. So I think we have, it's easily testable. So this is why today we would like really to look into how this 5-step approach in this NDC guide developed by UNEP, Global ABC, and PEEP could be tested and implemented in the countries. And this is why we have very, very important speakers today. So we have our important speaker, Abdelmouti Ahmed Mourad, Head of the Energy Strategies and Policies Division, Ministry of Energy, Infrastructure of, no? It's Tunisia. Okay. UAE we don't have yet, but we do have Hassan El Agrabi, Head of the International Cooperation, National Agency for Energy Conservation of Tunisia. Your pleasure. Please come. And we have Kennedy. Kennedy Mateka, Deputy Director of Ministry of Land, Public Works, Housing and Urban Development. So we are very excited to have you here. And yes, so we would like to hear from you about maybe first of all, Mr. Hassan El Agrabi, about your experience. I don't know, you need to probably take your microphones. to take your microphones, and we would be really interested to hear that we know that Tunisia has demonstrated already commitment to sustainable development, climate resilience, and as we discussed, the role of the national determined contribution. Could you please share your experience in Tunisia, like your practical experience about how you're working towards decarbonization of the building sector and how it is connected to the NDCs?
First of all, thank you for this opportunity to be with you today to explain the experience of Tunisia, especially in the building sector and the NDCs and the approach adopted by Tunisia. Our approach in support to decarbonization in Tunisia is in a timeline with the climate change objective and NDC goals, and especially in the building sectors. But Tunisia has updated has submitted the updated NDCs in 2021. That the goal is to reduce carbon intensity to 45% in reference to the year 2010. And it is important to sign that the energy sector, maintained the biggest percentage, that 72% coming from the energy sector to reduce energy gas emission. After that, we have Tunisia has done is SMBC's national strategy, low carbon strategy, in order to reduce the electricity and to divide by 5 in the horizon 2050. And in this field, the objective, or after that, we done an action plan to implement, to go ahead to have a concrete action per sector. We done an investment plan by sector, that the principal sector is electricity, industry, transport, and buildings. The first percentage, the first class, it's for the industry to reduce about, we have some numbers to sign, about 45% of energy reduction of energy gas emission. And after that, in second place, we have the building sector to 22% to reduce the gas emission, and to have to attain in the goal 2030 about 9.5 million ton CO2 reduced. For this region, we've done many programs to implement this, to implement and to attain this goal. Many programs and supported by the government and supported by the Energy Transition Fund that's created by the NME, by Tunisia, and implemented by the NME, the National Agency for Energy Conservation, to encourage investment in this field. They have many programs that say that the program for solar thermal, for example, Prosol and Prosol for rooftop, and we have many program, national program that is in the strategy. We have other strategy of sobriety energetic and other strategy of precarity energetic, that we have many national program in the field of buildings and in relation of the building sectors, like the Promo Clean, the air conditioning that consume more and more, and the individual air conditioning in the houses needs intervention, urgent intervention now, and we have a program, specific program for this. And the lighting also, it's a very famous program, PromoLED, that we begin with a program, a project financed by the KfW, by the German cooperation. It's credit and the subsidy to implement in the public establishment the energy efficiency technology, like the LED. It's very profitable to begin with the LED because it's easy to use, and it's we have the turnover. It's very quickly to have a turnover from the program Promolet. Also, we have many other programs like the program. Now we spoke about the program in the Muscat to reduce the consumption in the Muscat, also air conditioning, the buildings, intervention in the buildings, and we have other programs that to help us to decarbonize the sector, the building sector. For this why the building sector have very prioritized in Tunisia. It's une priorité, great priority in Tunisia. For this, we have very big intention, and for this field to reduce the energy emissions, the gas emissions, and decarbonize the buildings in general.
Thank you so much. It's, I think it's really probably, what we can hear from you is that the idea is really what you are doing is very kind of comprehensive approach, right? That
Yes.
you don't just have one program, but like you
many
prioritize.
many programs, and we with the cooperation, some programs done and supported by the government, and some programs supported by the government and in the field with the cooperation, international cooperation, like Germany cooperation, like French cooperation, to help us to go on and to attain our objective, NDC's objective in 2050 now. And we have many programs, the NME also, for example, when we say that certification or maps, the NME, we agree, we give the agreement for laboratory when we have the certification of air conditioning or all lamps is done by laboratory certificated in the government laboratory, and the certification is controlled by the enemy. We done the agreement, and they help us to have a new technology in this laboratory in timeline with the standards, international standards.
Right. Thank you so much also for mentioning importance of international cooperation and promoting international standards. So definitely for the NDCs, kind of exchange of the experiences,
Yes.
international standards are really important. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. Yes. So now the question, Kennedy, to you. We know what a great work you're doing on building sector. In Kenya, we were at your national building forum. I think our director, Dechen Sering, was at your building forum. So we saw how many different stakeholders you're actually engaging already into the process of decarbonization. So that would be especially interesting, you know, what you're doing to ensure that NDCs are actually kind of actionable, investable. And also, I think one of the issues that we're discussing about engaging the private sector and other stakeholders. So, and we heard a lot about your priority on affordable housing. So how all these things are kind of getting together and yeah, so how you're connecting this decarbonization and NDCs and engagement of the stakeholders. I know it's a very complex question, but we heard how much you have done already. So looking forward to hear from you.
Thank you. In Kenya, we look at NDCs as part of our national commitments, which informs policy decisions. And each of the sectors that are covered in the NDCs, and realizing that Kenya submitted its updated NDC in 2020, and therefore we have an obligation up to the year 2030 to realize our commitments for climate actions. And for us in the building sector, we are well covered in the Kenya's NDC in different spheres, whether it is in the issues of resource efficiency, in this case, whether it is energy, whether it is in water conservation or building materials. But then there are challenges that comes into the implementation of the NDCs. From where we sit, we have national programs that have been aligned, whether it's in the renewable energy sector, whether it is the affordable housing and sustainable urban development sector. And therefore, these priority sectors then inform the kind of interventions that we are keen on implementing. But of important are the three areas that I want us to look at. One of it is the issues of enabled policy. Policy frameworks arising from the commitments are very key. Policies really define whether you want to achieve, whether you want to encourage, whether you want to commit, and also bring on board, and then have an inclusive approach. And therefore, issues relating to policy is very key. Between the year 2020, when we updated our NDC, to date, we have done quite a number of enabling legislations and legal frameworks to support us deliver our NDC. Specifically on issues of the building sector, or the building and construction sector, we did and we initiated in 2019 a review of the National Building Code. It has been a process, but this year in July, we did inaugurate a new building code that is to be implemented starting March next year. And therefore, that is a milestone. And if you look at the building code itself, there are quite a number of interventions that we'll be keen on in terms of ensuring that we commit our NDC or realize our NDC commitments into the building code. But of course, there's always an opportunity that the building code that we have has a further opportunity of being updated or even reviewed. As we speak, a team has been set up to, sensitize and implement the building code through up to the time we talk about the 2025. In the same conversation and looking into our national building code that we did launch July this year, we have a component relating to sustainable buildings. And of importance in that section is the need for us to have a national green building guidelines. On 27th this month, we are convening a national workshop in Nairobi, supported by quite a number of partners, including the International Finance Corporation, to have a forum where key stakeholders have been invited, including our Kenya Green Building Society, represented here today, and quite a number of other partners, to come and agree and come up with a pathway on how best we need as a country develop a national green building guidelines. This is in line with our NDC commitment, and therefore, we are keen and very ready to bring on board all stakeholders. And the most key stakeholder in the process are our colleagues and any person who is involved in the affordable housing program. In fact, when we are developing our national green building guidelines, we are anchoring them under the affordable housing program, which is a national priority project in our government. And therefore, we'll be keen to see how best policies support the implementation of the NDC. We have other policies that we have developed on the way, one of it being long-term low emission development pathway of up to 2050, and it has an interesting components in the building and construction sector, as well as even a national cooling plan. So these are some of the policy initiatives that we have done as a country, and we also invite each and every one of you to come forward, be part of the implementation, and that is the approach we use in Kenya. The second area that will be keen, apart from policy, is building the technology that is so required for us to enable and realize all these commitments. And this is where we look for enhanced cooperation and partnerships with each and every one of you, so that you come and build the relevant systems in place for us to deliver the commitments that are in the national policies and even that are international commitments otherwise. So we're also calling each and every one of you to see how the best innovations that we have at a global level then can come to Kenya and be harnessed in the process of us delivering the affordable housing program and even quite a number of other programs that we are dealing with that. The last part is very key in terms of capacity. And in this case, that's how we look at it back home. There is need for us to develop and homegrown solutions to our own problems. When we talk about the waste, when we talk about the challenges that we do face, there is need for us to learn and even unlearn some of the things that we have. And therefore, the idea relating to building capacity is very key, and we'll be looking forward to see how best, even as a country and even as a continent, then we can harness and learn from each other and support each other to ensure that the inclusion of the private sector, the inclusion of our academia, and each and every persons that are involved in the process of delivery of each of the NDC then is brought forward, and views relating to, that inclusion is taken care of moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a really amazing, comprehensive presentation. I think it was so rich. I think we need to listen again and again. And fortunately, this session is recorded, so we'll definitely, come back to your presentation in the more recorded form. But of course, also, this is one of the sessions that we're having here. But we continue discussion, and we would like to really see how it will go, how it progress also in the future. So thank you so much. We were supposed to have like one more speaker, but unfortunately he got sick, so he sent his apologies. It's unfortunate, but I think we had a very rich discussion. So I would like to ask you to give applause to our speakers, because they are really the heroes who are leading this national process. Thank you so much. And we will continue following your amazing experiences, so congratulations. And now we try to get to discuss more with different partners about how else, like following Kennedy's call for partnerships and working all together. I would like to invite our panelists. So Gregory, you're presenting PEEP. We have Cool Coalition, Landre Chasore, Senior Advisor at Africa Sea for All. Do we have it? Yes, fantastic. Thank you so much. Alice Bond from the Alice, please. World Green Business Council. Rebecca Ochong, who's speaking today, but will be speaking also in today's with us from Habit of Humanity. So please come here. So I think it's really exciting discussions that we'll be having. So, and what we want, yes, and Cook, of course, YSSG. Yes. So we will have the panel, and then Nigel, you will make summary for us later on, right? Fantastic. That's good. So we produce, different organizations produce different reports, which are really to help countries to ensure that the way NDCs are developed, so they are actually very clear, fundable. So can you present a bit of of your products, and then also say how you make sure that actually they're usable, the reports that you're producing, they are usable. So it's quite, maybe we should start, Rebecca, with you. You have already the microphone. So, Habitat of Humanity, so your report highlights that in most NDCs, informal settlements are treated as cross-cutting issues, rather being integrated into climate strategy. And we know that actually this scope will actually be looking very actively into the NDCs, because we also will have, I think tomorrow, day after tomorrow, right? We have the informality group, working group, which will be led by the high-level champions. So how you making sure that this topic is actually integrated in NDCs, because it's a super intensive, difficult topic. Rebecca, to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gulnara. So as you heard, my name is Rebecca Ochong from Habitat for Humanity International. I don't know how many of you know about Habitat for Humanity, but we are a housing-focused organization. So really very aligned with what we are discussing here. Of course, part of what we look at as buildings. Our work, we do our work directly, working with communities, building homes. But at the same time, we are advocating for housing, and then also work at the market systems level to ensure that housing products works for the, for the low income. Now, we actually, yes, that is true. We did that analysis of housing and informal settlements in NDCs. It was quite a process because looking through all the 194, or I think 196 NDCs to try and identify how much is housing reflected. And it confirmed a lot of our fears that we've had for a while, that housing, for some reason, doesn't seem to be prioritized in many ways, and particularly with regards to climate change. And yet we know how housing is important for climate action. And I think many people who are here, I think you're already converted, you know how important housing and in general the building sector is to climate change. But then despite this importance, we found that only 21% of countries are incorporating housing in a significant way in their NDCs. About 60% are not incorporating at all or very minimal. So we were really concerned. And then looking at informal settlements, we found that only 16 of the 194 NDCs that we reviewed include informal settlements as a national issue, and only 10 NDCs include informal settlements as an urban issue. Now, we know that informal settlements are one of the areas that really bear the brunt of climate change. First of all, they're often located in the most undesirable places of the city, which means prone to flooding, various disasters and so on. But also knowing this, and then we are not including them, which means if we are not doing that, then we are not going to be able to address their living situation. We know that housing is a huge issue globally, 2.8 billion so far, experiencing different levels of housing inadequacy. Informal settlements currently about 1.1 billion, like Gulnara said. Now, when we looked at some of the reasons, why this might be happening, we identified several reasons, and one of them was the issue around the siloed working in government and also in policy processes. You find that sometimes the urban, ministry or the housing ministry and the environment ministry and other ministries, they are not kind of working together. So it's more of how do we ensure that whole of government approach in addressing these issues, because climate change, as we say, it's borderless and it's cross-cutting, it's almost happening everywhere. But how are we ensuring that what is happening in other sectors is reflected in those climate strategies? And for me, I think I see a lot of hope now, and like you say, there's going to be the informality working group that is being established. These are things that were not happening. About 2, 3, 4 COPs ago, we never had this kind of conversation. So I think the more we have this kind of conversations, then we ensure that some of the people that have always been left behind regarding issues around climate change, then they are more included. Something else that we found also was issues around resource limitations, particularly in developing country contexts. You find many governments have got other priorities, maybe it's education or health and so on, and then they end up not addressing issues around housing. But sometimes we are very surprised when that happens, because we know how housing is very important for achieving all other development outcomes, whether it is education, health, and so on. Habitat for Humanity conducted a research just about a year ago to look at, what would be the benefit of upgrading informal settlements at scale. From that report, we found that if we upgraded informal settlements at scale, GDP in certain countries could go up to about 10.5%. About 43 million children would be able to go to school, would have about 730,000 lives could be saved, and even life expectancy could go up by about 2.5 years, So there's a lot of, a lot of benefits for us in addressing, housing and climate change, because we know that apart from addressing issues around of climate action, we also have an impact on also other areas. And then the other area that we saw also just the scale and complexity of informal settlements. I think anybody who has worked in informal settlements, we know that one of the areas that they really struggle with is issues around secure tenure. Most of them always live under constant threat of eviction because they don't have the rights to the land on which they live. So you find that most people, because they don't have those rights, they don't have the motivation to invest in proper homes. So you find most of the homes there are not structurally adequate. So if we really want to address these issues and we include housing in these climate strategies, then we'll be in a position to address the living situations in those communities, so that then they can be able to effectively withstand those climate shocks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I think that was, it's actually a very difficult topic, right, to include to the NDC guidelines. So I think for our colleagues, that would be the question as well, how to bring these kind of sensitive questions, because we say about NDCs being inclusive, right, but you know, how actually we're able to do that, how to make sure that it's happening, because informal settlements really, they continue to proliferate, you know, across the globe, and actually in the developing countries, but also in developed countries. So that's probably also the question to everybody, how we get these sensitive issues also addressed in the NDC guidance documents. So Alice, so the floor next to you, and you know, just before the meeting, we just had a short chat about the World Green Council already doing something very practical on ground. Yeah, could you share a bit about your approach and, you know, maybe also kind of ideas, what you learned from your very practical work already, and, you know, what do you think the key recommendation for the future?
Oh, thanks so much. So at the World Green Building Council, we are currently working on a project called the NDC Scorecard for Sustainable Buildings. And it's a tool that we're developing with 5 pilot countries from around the world. And it's it allows to see the gaps in the best practice sustainable built environment policies against the NDC in that country, but also against the country-based policies as well. So not just in the NDCs, but in the wider country policies. And what it allows, what the tool allows is a gap analysis of those policies. So there's really clear next steps of what needs to be included in those policies for the country going forward as next ambitious steps for the country. And the process that we've gone about to develop the project and enable the project is through working with our 5 pilot green building councils. But as we're developing the project, we are running a series of in-country workshops which include the government for that country, local stakeholders, industry, as well as working with our wider network of over 75 green building councils through mechanisms such as our policy task force. So that's to gain an international oversight of what we're developing, but also buy-in from the local stakeholders as we're developing the scorecard and the tool. And we're working on this now kind of with the background of the NDC cycle being updated next year. The latest stats show that we're really not on track. So the current commitments in the NDCs are more on track for kind of 2.5 to 2.9 degrees of warming. And a recent stat I found was that 60% of the floor areas are yet to be built. So that's floor areas by 2050, which we're still building. And it's a little bit of an old method of describing it, but every week we're building a floor area about the size of Paris. So it really just shows you that everything we're building now will be around for many, many years to come, and it's really just not good enough. So kind of off the back of that and what's been happening and what needs to happen, we have just launched a new campaign called Be Bold on Buildings, which we are super excited about. And it's all about amplifying buildings and the built environment in NDCs and in national policies, particularly ahead of the next cycle of updates next year, which we are really hopeful for. And I guess in terms of ambition, as we have been developing the project, we have seen over 100 different policies that we could include for the built environment. And what's really important is to understand which of the policies which have the greatest impact. And that might be that it's different on a country by country basis, on a regional basis, but there will be some which are globally relevant as well. So part of the process of the project is trying to understand where is the impact for those different policies. And next year, we're super excited to kind of scale the project to go beyond the 5 pilot countries. So once we understand how the project works in different countries and different regions, we will be scaling the project to work across our network as well. So that is what we're working on at the moment, and we're really excited to hopefully engage with some of you in the future to develop it further.
Thank you so much, Alice. I think we are very excited to hear about your practical experiences in 5 cities, and really we'll be looking your continuous work on other countries as well in the future, and definitely be bold.
Be bold on buildings is
Be
the
bold in
tagline,
buildings.
yeah.
I agree with you. I'm very big fan of the campaign as well as Audrey presented it before. So really good luck, and we will be following on this. Yeah.
Oh, thanks so much.
Thank you. Gregor, as coming from GIZ and Partnership for Energy Efficiency in Buildings, PEEP, you are one of the leaders for this guide, for the guide on the NDCs. I think it's a very good document. It came out very well, so congratulations. So maybe just, would you like to say a few words about it? And also maybe what are the plans from, like, what is your view, how you would like to use it, kind of what would be concrete next steps?
All right, thank you, Gulnara. Thank you for having me here. Yes, as you said, I will talk a bit about the guide on how to better include the buildings and construction sector in the NDCs, especially now in the NDC 3.0 process that is currently ongoing. Just one more word on PEEP, in case someone is not familiar with that. So PEEP, and I have to read that out so that I don't make it wrong, is a multi-donor program implemented by the French AFD and by GIZ, and is implementing work in 21 countries around the world. So to provide you a bit of a backdrop against which this guide was developed. Currently, the buildings and construction sector make up about 21% of global greenhouse gas emissions on the globe. In addition to that, 50% of the buildings being built by 2050 are not yet in existence. So an optimist would probably say that provides a huge potential for mitigation. A pessimist would say, okay, if we don't get that right, we have a lot of additional greenhouse gas emissions to come. So therefore, I think this guide is really timely and really important. So the guide looks at how we can make those NDCs that come up ambitious, investable, actionable, and inclusive. So to develop the guide, basically the PEEP team and others went through all the NDCs and looked at what kind of part the buildings and construction sector is currently playing in the existing NDCs. Good news is, in more than 80%, the buildings and construction sector is somewhat mentioned, somewhat touched, and also in a variety of topics, from building materials up to adaptation. But where there's a good part, there's usually also a not so good part, and I come to that now. So we do see a couple of shortcomings in the existing NDCs. We see a lack of comprehensive targets for the buildings and construction sector, clear financing strategies, and strategies how to implement those targets. I would say that's not particularly only for the buildings and construction sector, but for virtually all sectors. But here it's particularly striking. Only 18% of all NDCs have quantifiable mitigation targets for the buildings and construction sector, and only 16%, 16%, identify financing options for these measures. In addition to that, most NDCs that contain built environment measures only target one aspect of the entire scope, for example, energy efficiency for appliances. So they, in general, do not pursue an integrated approach, not looking at the entire building and also not looking into integrating cradle-to-grave approaches. And in addition to that, only half of the NDCs look at adaptation for the buildings and construction sector. Again, as for many cases, adaptation is lagging behind, but I would argue for the building and construction sector, it's absolutely fundamental to get the adaptation part prominently covered and get it right. So in kind of summing up, if you want to have these NDCs 3.0, the buildings and construction sector ambitiously integrated to it. Based on that analysis in the guide, we would argue that of course it's fundamental to setting ambitious and measurable targets, but that's not enough. The NDCs should also be comprehensively address the entire buildings, as Kennedy has mentioned, for example, through green building codes. Also looking at entire life cycles of the buildings, building materials, operational energy, etc., etc. So not only one aspect in the lifetime of buildings. Adaptation is key, as I have mentioned, for ambitious NDCs. And ambitious NDCs also need to address how those measures can be implemented. There need to be clear responsibilities in terms of institutions, funding, and concrete financing strategies. And kind of conclude and sum up this. Of course, it's also true that in the end, ambition might look very different depending on the specific country context. That is also something PEEP experienced in the 21 countries they are working in. And therefore, also one part of that guide is it represents different policy options with kind of a, it's actually not a lighting system, but it's basically 3 columns where it says what is easier to implement, what's more difficult to implement. So it provides different options for different realities in different countries. And I stop here for now.
Thank you so much, Gregor. And Landre, maybe also to you. I mean, you are representing Sustainable Energy for All, right? And Cool Coalition. Maybe also from your side, what are perspectives? We know that under Cool Coalitions there is also guidance on NDCs. So what are perspectives about making sure the NDC is actually very concrete, inclusive, you know, and investable, fundable?
Thank you. Thanks so much for having SE4All here today. Well, really, I'd like to start with our report, our 2023 report, Chilling Prospects, which was first published in 2018. And really what it does is it helps to define and quantify the cooling access challenge that we have globally. And the 2023 stats, I think as someone said previously, we're not quite on track. At the moment, it identifies over 1 billion people who are at risk, over 1 billion people, I think 1.17 billion people, who are at risk in rural and urban communities across the world. It also identifies 9 critical countries as well where people are most at risk for poor access to cooling, either for thermal comfort, for productive cooling in businesses and agriculture and similar, and also for social uses as well. So for vaccines, the cooling chain. So that's really our background on this at SE4All. So we do a lot of studies around that. I think you mentioned earlier about an all-of-government approach to NDCs. One thing that we do at SE4All is we develop energy transition plans in partnerships with countries, and there we use an all-of-government approach. And so it's an all-of-economy study, that data study that we do in partnership with governments, working with various ministries and departments, and as I said, it's all of economy, so it goes through the different sectors and tries to determine a decarbonization pathway. So it's oil and gas, it's industry, it's construction, it's clean cooking as well, and also power. That helps to identify the potential opportunities for decarbonization in different sectors. In the construction sector, it will also include cooling as well. It helps you to identify the process there, also helps you identify the technologies that you can use, and therefore it helps you identify investment opportunities. It gives you a price tag. So the energy transition plan as a whole provides a price tag of what it would cost for an economy to grow in a green way, but also what it would also cost to decarbonize. So in the building sector, it gives you that price tag. The Energy Transition Plan is an all-of-government plan that countries are using to feed into their NDCs. So in that way, you are able to have a sense of this is the data and this is how it will flow. And these are the projects that I need to implement to achieve this. So it in some ways gives you NDCs an investable dimension. I mean, it's quite complicated to do this, or a little complicated, shall I say, but it's not impossible. And the needs for cooling vary dramatically across businesses and populations, and cooling solutions are tailored to different groups. Again, that's what the Chilean Prospect Study does. If you look at it, it's on se4.org, sorry, plug. What it does is it helps you, it gives you different dimensions. It gives you the gender dimension. It talks about poor access, it measures access in low-income communities, in high-income communities, in medium and various. So it helps you see the different demographics and gives you a three-dimensional data picture. So national policies and NDCs for sustainable cooling haven't quite reflected detailed financing strategies, which is why in our approach we support countries with this energy transition plan that helps you see what the cost will be in the building sector, building construction sector. And I think for NDCs to be a little bit more investable, countries should quantify their investments, ETPs, in their NDCs by evaluating the costs and benefits of transitioning to sustainable cooling technologies, including those in particular for the most vulnerable populations. And I think it's also important to lay out the most suitable financing strategies in these NDCs according to the national circumstances. Again, if I go to the example of the Energy Transition Plan, it could be public finance. Again, I think in the previous panel, we were talking about the affordable housing program. So public finance, that might support it. Private sector, domestic private sector, because then that ensures that we have practical of local currency financing opportunities. Also working with DFIs as well, who can provide concessional support. And if we build a capital stack and layer the various forms of finance, it's workable. A little complicated, but it can be done in an all-of-government way. I'm going to stop there for the moment.
Yes. Thank you so much. And as we are really focusing on the finance, so Hugh, it would be good to hear from you as Senior Program Manager at the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change, to hear more about exactly what is being done. I mean, we had lots of discussions, I think, in the Building to COP discussions as well. So I think there is still lots of doubts how much investables NDCs are on building construction. So, how we're doing now and what we can do to improve it.
Yeah, thanks, Gulnara. So Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change, we bring around 420 institutional investors together to really work on a net zero and resilient future, ensuring that investors integrate climate risk as financial risk. So I think the NDCs 3.0 provides a really great opportunity to bring policy and finance together. Obviously, we've heard countries are looking for finance to achieve their climate and development goals, and that obviously needs to be beyond just public finance. We can't achieve our goals if we're just relying on public finance. We need to bring the private sector on board. And I guess investors are also looking for countries' technological and sectoral opportunities and investment potential from the transition as well. And over the last sort of 6 or 7 months, we've brought together a group of institutional investors to really work on what an investable NDC looks like. What do investors want to see from an NDC to allow some of that capital to flow? And it really made 5 recommendations, and it's really great to see that actually some of them were already picked up by Kennedy and by Hassan on the previous panel, and by our colleagues here as well. But I'll just quickly go through some of those recommendations. So first one is really provide that granular sectoral pathways and underlying macroeconomic context in the country. We know that buildings pathways at that sort of, or Paris-aligned buildings pathways already exist. In Europe and in global north and developed countries, we have the carbon risk real estate monitor that investors are using to align their portfolios. And then we're also seeing some of these emerge in emerging markets and developing economies. So, we have the IFC Edge tool, which provides that bottom-up approach. But we really need to see those integrated to provide those that investor perspective and give investors that confidence of those. Secondly, picking up on what my colleague here said, we really need to see those quantifying the investment needs and preparing financial strategies for the countries to help investors identify those long-term investment opportunities. So, as Hassan said, providing that quantum of the buildings and importantly, not just the public finance quantum, but also the private sector and how the private sector can work with the public sector to provide that confidence for private sector investors. Then the third sort of key recommendation is around that, we've discussed it a lot, that supportive policy and regulatory environment, ensuring that the frameworks are there to achieve NDCs. In Kenya, Kennedy, it was great to see what you're doing in Kenya on outlining those frameworks. And then the other one I'll just pick up on as well is around the governance and stakeholder engagement in the process of developing NDCs. It's really important that we see countries engage and collaborate with the private sector on developing these. They shouldn't be just developed in silos. We need to see that engagement. Last week we brought together some climate finance negotiators and investors to discuss this, so we're really keen to see that collaboration. And then finally, the final piece is really around global harmonization and trying to have a little bit of consistency among NDCs. Obviously, bearing in mind all countries are different and will have different pathways, but really ensuring that there's a level of consistency. And obviously, that's something that the Buildings Breakthrough is trying to achieve at that global level. So that harmonization is really, really great to see. And I think, there's a great opportunity here. If we collaborate, work hard together, I think we can really see and create sort of investable NDCs.
Great, thanks so much. I think we're really looking forward to continue working with you and the whole group of investors through you to really make sure that this actually happens. I mean, as you mentioned already, Kenya is taking on board many recommendations, so we definitely need kind of more in-depth, but we know that it's huge work, right? It's still huge work in advance of us. Now I wanted to ask Nigel Tonks, who is a Sustainable Development Director and Senior Advisor to the Climate Champions team, but he also with Arup, as a Sustainable Development Director, just give you perspective, first of all, from the private sector to the discussion, but also as you were engaged in all this discussion on NDCs for so long, maybe just comment a bit, because it was very, very rich discussion. It's very difficult to summarize it, I think, because it's quite a lot of information, but maybe still give you observations. So what do you think, what are the key points you find for yourself, and what we should be working on in the future?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Golnara, and thanks, panel, for an amazing... I've been scribbling away notes like crazy. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nigel Tonks. I'm a Sustainable Development Director with Arup. We're an international firm of consulting engineers. We have 17,000 staff working in 90 countries around the world. So we're in 90 cities around the world. So we're working in a lot of countries where we're very, very, very keen to see how the NDCs of those countries develop and can help the built environment. We're grateful for this opportunity to add our voice for industry, for the call for nations of the Paris Agreement to deliver strong, ambitious NDCs, which relate specifically to buildings and the built environment. And I commend our speakers, Kennedy and from Tunisia, and it's a pity that the minister from the UAE couldn't be here with us today. Also an impressive, comprehensive NDC recently published by the UAE with, as our other two speakers, a very detailed set of targets. So we need those NDCs with clear goals for buildings, backed up by clear plans. And I also heard that we need governments to be facilitating engagement with industry and non-state actors to support you in delivering and implementing your plans. Strong policy objectives are necessary. We need energy codes with rising minimum levels of efficiency. We need to introduce embodied carbon limits to ramp up retrofitting. We need to incentivize the switch from fossil fuel to electric, to promote renewables. We must address resilience and adaptation and efficient cooling. We need to raise public awareness for energy conservation. These are the things that will attract this long-term private investment and can help us accelerate the transition to a decarbonised sector. I wanted to just offer that it's not just my voice here, but I wanted to offer some evidence that nations should be emboldened by the wealth of credible action that is emerging from industry. And perhaps this is one of the things that gives me the qualifications to stand here and say this today. Over the last 2 years, I've been very involved with nearly 300 actors from across the built environment sector supply chain. And we've come together in the UK to create a science-based and fully comprehensive net zero building standard. This is a bottom-up, voluntary certification aligned with the National Decarbonisation Pathway, which was also drafted by industry. And I can say that every one of those 300 individuals, from developers, investors, consultants, manufacturers, were all really intent on creating a basis for which our government can use and adopt and help them de-risk the regulation that we so urgently need. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development is working really closely with industry through its Market Transformation Action Agenda. That is creating a guiding path towards halving emissions by 2030 to reach net zero by 2050. This month, the initiative has released a 12-step policy framework which focuses on transforming the real operational performance of buildings. And that includes the standard definition of net zero, mandatory disclosure of performance, performance limits, and, as been mentioned before, incentives. As well as these collaborative efforts, organisations are making their own transformative commitments. Since June 2020, over 14,000 members have joined the Race to Zero campaign. These are companies, cities, regions, financial, educational and healthcare institutions, and they're taking rigorous and immediate action to halve global emissions by 2030 to deliver a fairer and healthier net zero world. Arup is in the Race to Zero, and more than that, we've committed to carry out whole life cycle carbon assessments for all of our building design work around the world, and to withdraw from working on fossil fuels. So these are just several of the strong signals that, of collaborative and tangible action that is coming from industry. But industry, we can't do this on our own, and despite our efforts, we will not move the dial far enough or fast enough to halve emissions by 2030 without those stronger objectives from our national governments. And so we call on governments to set detailed, specific, we heard, ambitious and near-term 2030 targets for mitigation and for adaptation in their NDCs. We call on them to explicitly address informality. Thank you, Becca, for bringing that to the debate today. We need clear action plans, and we need our governments to forge direct engagement with industry to drive this implementation. And so if I could just echo Alice's words, we need to be bold on buildings, and we need to do it now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nigel. I think you can sit here for now because it seems that we still have time to ask some questions and maybe to have some statements from our completely full today pavilion. So thank you so much. I think it was really a great assessment, what was discussed and what could be the priorities for the future. So we actually wanted, given we have time today, maybe to get some statements or questions from the audience first, just to have it more interactive. Yes, please. Thank you so much for giving the microphone.
Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Just to mention that by name Robert Sangori from the Ministry of Lands, Public Works, Housing, Urban Development, the Republic of Kenya. I'm with my colleague Kennedy, who has spoken here. One of the issues that I want to draw the attention of the REACH panel, starting with the policy team that were ahead of the panel, is as we look at the issue of buildings and the connection of buildings and climate change, there is still, in my view, a huge gap in terms of what are the practical steps of bringing the issues of building into the climate conversation. Now, we have the landscape of urban and rural housing, for example, but picking the aspect of shelter and its real contribution to the ordinary common person at the grassroots. What is it that then we unpack to provide them with the understanding of what we are able to direct the clear carbon footprints of buildings? At our level here, we will be understanding that of course, we have the dichotomy of the embodied energy vis-a-vis the operational energy. Currently, the data that we have more or less tend towards the operational energy. But what about the embodied energy? What are the clear elements that we are tracing to the building in terms of the embodied energy, where we are then looking at the contribution of the sector in the overall climate conversation, all the way from the local materials manufacture, the transportation of the materials to the sites of construction, or the life cycle all the way from identification of the building materials to the where they are now made, where they are now used at the construction stages. So there's still a challenge. As researchers in the sector, being one of them, I find still that's a challenge that the partnership which Kennedy called for, therefore, need to still further go to unpack the clear intervention which each partner is bringing on board to get us to where we are able to tell the clear contributions that we are linking the sector in the climate conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was really very inspiring, again, speaking about Kenya example. I think on the embodied carbon, we had actually quite a number of sessions already, right, in this pavilion. And we will have more actually tomorrow as well. But if anybody of panelists would like to comment on it, basically it was a question. It was at one hand about importance, including housing and informalities, but also about embodied carbon. So Rebecca, you want to go first, and Nigel, I see you are motivated to go the second. Yeah. And,
yeah, thanks.
Okay.
I will attempt. I don't know whether I have the correct answer. But I think speaking from where I sit, especially from Habitat for Humanity, and particularly on our work that we do and work with communities around the world, it's about how are we involving those communities? How are we being people-centered in the work that we do? So I know the jargon around climate change is I think many people don't understand it yet. So if you're able to translate it, I think for me, I'm speaking from a community point of view, the people that maybe you're trying to address and trying to see how they can, also be part of this solution. How are we building their capacity to be able to understand how their actions or inaction is leading to, the effects of climate change? But at the same time, also, how are you also empowering them to also be able to adapt? Because I think a bigger issue for me, especially in the global south, is more about how do we build that resilience. of this community to the impacts of climate change. But I think there have been many, I think I've seen in some of the work that we do, we also attempt to, to do some of this work that address the mitigation measures, for example, in terms of how, the cooking, the kind of cooking stoves that they're using, how energy efficient are they, for example. Some of the work we do is around when we're building, using locally sourced materials. And we've discovered in a lot of the work that we do that also traditional ways that they were building, that was being built before, was actually more climate, I would say more energy efficient or climate responsive compared to how now we are building with blocks. So how are we able to make that change? Because some communities, when you tell them to build with the older materials that their ancestors built with, they look at it that is for poor people. They prefer the stones, and because it's a status symbol that, when you live in a stone kind of building. So I think it's more of how we educate and empower the community so that then they can be able to understand how their action or inaction is impacting the environment.
Thank you so much, Becca. Nigel, you wanted to add? And then Alice, anyway, after that, Alice, yeah.
Okay, just a small comment. So I think embodied carbon, thank you for raising it, an incredibly important aspect of decarbonising our built environment. It's a really significant contribution to the emissions, and if 60% of our built environment has yet to be built, then obviously there's a massive contribution that is yet to happen. One of the things that I've discovered through conversations with governments is there's often a nervousness to introduce embodied carbon limits, precisely because of the capacity concerns that you've raised, Rebecca. Are people able to produce the assessments and calculations of the embodied carbon? Is the data available? In parts of the world, there are very few embodied carbon factors, EPDs, available to come up with that sort of data. So one remedy that we're seeing to that is city planning policy. So cities are moving ahead very quickly and enabling national governments by requiring planning consent, people submitting data. And, at the moment, there's very broad requirements around the quality of that data, because it's trying to give everybody the opportunity to understand how to do the calculations, where to get the information from. But that is starting to introduce into the industry the capability to perform these calculations. It's starting to produce the data where we can set some benchmarks in the future. And that can then be gifted to national government and say, we know that for commercial buildings, for housing, for science and technology, we know that these are the benchmark performances. And so in order to start setting some limitations, start with these. So I think that's important. Cities can play a big role in enabling this.
Right, thank you, Nigel, and maybe Alice.
And thanks so much for your comments. Just to add a really quick policy point. So I think if you think about all of the sustainable built environment policies, you could probably come up with many hundreds of very different policies which have very varying levels of impact, and they're relevant in different countries and less relevant in other countries. But I think really being able to simplify what that means and what that impact is for your country, and being able to understand what the impact is of those policy positions is really important. So it's relevant and localized, and not using a factor which may be helpful in a different country. So very quick point from me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Alice. And before we end, I think it will give us a bit of time kind of for the informal discussion as well. I understand we also need to announce with World Green Building Council, but with Audrey already posed in front of the screen. So we made all the official handshaking. So I guess, I don't know, Audrey, you want to announce it yourself? So.
Yeah, just to say, obviously as World GBC, we've been collaborating for a long time informally with Global Alliance for Building and Construction, but with the I think, challenges we now face in the sector, we decided it was time to maybe formalise that. So very excited today that we've signed an MOU for cooperation for many years to come, but particularly looking at ahead to COP30 and what we can do together on the NDC. So the scorecard that Alice mentioned is building on the fantastic work that the Global ABC have published today, also from PEEB as well, looking at some of that. So I think there's really rich areas for collaboration in the next year. How can we get buildings on the agenda in the negotiations? What are we going to be doing on the NDCs? And also on the roadmaps process, because we both work on roadmaps. So just a deeper collaboration there, and hopefully bringing all of you in on that journey, because there's obviously quite a big appetite to take action on this topic. And I think if we all do it together, we're going to get there faster. So thank you for your cooperation, and to the team at Global ABC for making this happen.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. So much to the World Green Council, and really looking forward to continue working this cooperation in the future. So this pavilion is really kind of a lot for the informal discussion. So I would like to give floor to Malia, whom everybody knows Malia, right? So she's the hostess of this house, and I give floor to announce more exciting opportunities for tonight.
Hi, hello everyone. I kindly invite you tonight for a reception starting around 6:30, hosted by the USGBC. Looking forward to share an informal drink with you all. Yeah, at the pavilion, yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and we'll continue discussing. Thank you.